What's going on, guys? In this video I want to talk about my language learning journey and basically how I went from traditional language learning and jumped ship to comprehensible input. Now, if you're completely new to language learning, you know, what the traditional learning and comprehensible input might not be distinctions you're familiar with, so let me wait for this helicopter to go by and tell you about that. Just so everybody who watches this, and no matter where you are in your progress, can understand this, I'm just going to define my terms first. I think that there's basically two camps, and I'll define them how I see them. Traditional learning is what I thought language learning would be like when I first got into the space, which was high school language learning, basically, where they sit you in front of they sit you in a class. Sometimes it's a Spanish person teaching, but sometimes it's a person who speaks English teaching, and they just drill you grammar. They teach you small words. You get vocab. You get to learn tenses, sentence structure, things like that. And that's kind of how I thought Spanish learning would be. And then the new wave, we'll call it comprehensible input, but I want to keep this broad because, you know, there's a decent amount of infighting in the comprehensible input space, but to me the new understanding or the newer understanding of language learning basically is you listen to things that you can understand in your target language to learn that language. And you don't try to understand and compile rules and compile vocabulary lists in your head to be able to memorize and to understand a language. You know, when you watch Spanish content that's comprehensible, you might not be able to totally understand the words per se, but you can understand what's happening, and your mind can help assign meaning to the words you're hearing. You know, when you hear the word shovel, you just know what that is. You don't have to translate it. It just happens, you know? When I'm talking to you, you don't have to think to yourself, oh my God, is he in past tense? Is he in present tense? You just know, because those things are just unconsciously embedded in you. And of course, anybody coming to language learning who has no experience in language learning like I didn't, is probably gonna go more to the traditional side, because that's just what you're taught, you know, and that's what I was taught, and that's what everybody around you says you have to do. So that makes sense to start there. And everything else in the world, you kind of learn that way. I mean, like math and science, you're not really absorbing those unconsciously. Like you really do have to kind of drill, you know? You have to drill math, you gotta drill history, you gotta maybe, you know, flashcards are a thing, and all these things. That all applies to traditional learning, but it doesn't apply, in my opinion, to language learning. So it's unintuitive for people who are starting out learning a language to jump into this kind of newer idea of how one learns a language. I took 7 years of Spanish and I wasn't any better at Spanish, and I think that can be attributed to the fact that most things that they teach you in school do make sense for in a traditional context, but language learning does not. So I had tons of experience failing in language learning because I failed in language learning. When I came in, I didn't know what I was doing, so I tried everything, and now I have a bunch of experiences that didn't work that I want to share with you. Otherwise, they're wasted because, you know, they didn't work. So if I can help you guys not do them and tell you guys how I got to, I speak Spanish fluently now, how I arrived at that level in less than a year. So the first thing I tried off the advice of a friend was Duolingo. And I think it was a huge mistake, and now, because I wasted 2 months on top of the leaderboards doing Duolingo for 3 hours a day, I'm going to give you my opinions on what it felt like and why I don't think it was helpful. You know, coming from traditional language learning, it makes sense. Duolingo makes sense. It's like you drill, you fill in the blank. Basically, Duolingo is just kind of the traditional Spanish, the traditional language learners. It's very heavily influenced by people who subscribe to traditional methods. And the more I did it, the more I thought to myself, if this works, it'll be magic. Because it seemed to me that, like, I wasn't really getting a general understanding of the language through Duolingo. It seemed like I was just memorizing things. And the way I thought about it in my head was like, as time went on, how am I gonna memorize a whole language? Like, you know, how am I going to memorize a whole language? How am I going to memorize every grammar rule, every sentence structure, every vocab word? It just didn't make sense. I'm like, I could see memorizing to a certain point in language learning, but to memorize the whole entire language didn't make sense to me. It seemed to me like teaching someone how to play chess by just showing them super specific positions and how to win in super specific positions. Like if your opponent does this, this, and this, you should do this, this, and this. And then it's like, okay, I see how that could work if I was in that exact position, but you need to learn the fundamentals to play chess. You need to know what to do in the general case, not just in this really specific case. How is me memorizing these things eventually going to get me to actually be able to speak and listen to people in Spanish? Because during the time I was doing Duolingo, during the time I was using Duolingo, I was dating a girl who didn't speak very good English. So, you know, the contrast between how things that I would do and say with her and then things that I would hear in Duolingo, there was a huge difference. There was a huge gulf. And it didn't seem like Duolingo was bringing me anywhere closer to where I wanted to be. Instead, it was testing me on things that I didn't think were actually that pertinent to what I wanted to learn. A good example of this is one time we were getting groceries, and I got out of the car, and she goes, "Te chulo," and I was like, "What? What are you saying?" I had no idea what she was saying. I was almost angry because I was like, this wasn't in Duolingo, you know? And, you know, basically what she was saying was, "Te ayudo." And you would never see that in Duolingo for a few reasons. One, it means like, can I help you? But usually you'd see on Duolingo, "Te puedo ayudar." Like something like that. Something like, "Te puedo ayudar?" Like very formal, something you don't normally say to your friend. Also, she has an Argentinian dialect, which again, I didn't know about in Duolingo, where she doesn't say "te ayudo," she says "te ayudo." Third thing, in real Spanish, the words kind of clump together. So instead of saying "te ayudo," she said "te chulo," and with a little Argentinian accent too. So I mean, it didn't feel like Duolingo was getting me anywhere close to being able to understand like things that people say on a daily basis. Like if someone asked me to grab an apple from a table in really slow, radio perfect Spanish, maybe I could understand it. Maybe. I mean, maybe I can fill in the blank if they asked me to. But it just wasn't translating well to real life, this whole idea of this whole Duolingo thing. Because like radio perfect Spanish, like super clearly slow spoken, nobody speaks that way. There's so many different dialects, so many different accents. I mean, you're so unlikely to meet someone who has like a perfect radio accent, especially if you're like in the streets of Spain or you're talking to immigrants in Florida like me. Like the people are not speaking like "Yo me llamo Juan." Like they don't speak like that. And I get you start slow. In my opinion, there's a huge difference between Duolingo and like kind of like the robotic voice actor people and like slow, easy, comprehensible input. And just because comprehensible input, especially when it's slow and in the beginner stages, I guess you could say it can sound robotic, but it's not robotic. It's more like talking to a baby. And even though that's not like native speaking style, it still feels way more personal than Duolingo. Basically what I'm saying is that like people who just are doing a video with you in comprehensible input and super beginner, you'll just get some of their mannerisms, right? In Duolingo, it's so robotic, you know? In Duolingo, it's like probably paid voice actors reading a script, and that's just not real life. And again, I want to clarify, like again, like super beginner videos, they're also not real life, but it's similar. It's more similar. You get that personal feeling at least. I will say one good thing about Duolingo, because I spent this entire I spent like 10 minutes talking negatively about it. I do like the stories. I would listen to their like stories where they have two people talking to each other. And that's like mostly just comprehensible input, but I thought those were good. They had some like funny stories. They were always kind of like charming, and they were, in my opinion, they were a good resource. So that's one thing about Duolingo that I actually did enjoy. So another thing I did when I was getting started in language learning was listening to people who speak English teach Spanish. And usually they would teach the grammar and they would teach sentence structure, and their whole pitch would be, you can't learn Spanish from a native Spanish speaker because they don't know the challenges of someone who speaks English learning Spanish. And, you know, I guess it made sense to me at the time, but looking back, I really don't think it helped me at all. Also, I think that has a tendency to fall into this category of like, I learned Spanish my way. I have a really inflated sense of ego after I've learned a language. My way is the best way. It's the only way. My specific set of instructions, the only way you're going to get to be fluent in Spanish. And I think a lot of these teachers kind of fall into that trap. Or at least the one I was watching did. Sometimes people, he'd talk in his videos, he'd say, people always ask me, like, do you really need to know all the grammar to like learn Spanish to a high level? He would say, yes, you do. It's really important. It's the most important thing. You can't do it without it. Like, I'm sure he believes what he's saying, that you need to learn all these grammar rules and sentence structure and all these things to become fluent in Spanish, but I think he's just kind of locked into his own journey too much. Because he had learned grammar that way, or presumes he did, that is like the only way to do it. That's just not my experience at all. Like, I don't think you should state that with so much certainty. But like saying that the only way to learn a language is basically to like memorize and brute force through all of the vocab and grammar and sentence structure, I think really probably turns people off from learning a language. It falls into this category of thinking that I don't like, that says, it almost implies you have to be really smart to learn a language. And a lot of people think this. They're like, oh, like, well, you just learn a language because you're really smart. Like, I'm like, I personally, I think language learning comes down way more to determination, willpower, consistency, like than your intelligence. I would 100 times out of 100 take the guy who is consistent, can get out of bed and learn Spanish every day, over like the guy who's like super intelligent. I don't think that your intelligence really plays a huge factor in language learning. I think it's more about like how well you can pay attention, listen, and how much consistency you have to, learn Spanish every day, to listen to new content every day. Because it's not easy, but it's not because it's like hard in an intellectual way. It's just hard in like an ultra marathon way, where like you got to keep going and going and going and going, and it gets tiring. So it's all about your determination and willpower. I'm totally opposed to this idea that you have to like, be a great memorizer. You have to be like, you have to know all your grammar rules. You have to be like, you have to have a conscious understanding of how the language works to use it. There's some room for that, but I really, to me, and to most people I've talked to, it's true. If you learn a language to a certain level, eventually it just becomes input. Like in the beginning, maybe you do some grammar, maybe you do some vocab, maybe you do some flashcards, but as you go on, all that stuff starts to dip, and you just do input after a while. And I'll give you an example of something. So right around the time I was listening to him, I was also getting into the comprehensible input camp, and I think the last video I ever watched of his was a video where he talked about how Spanish can do like subject, verb, object, and object, verb, subject, which just means that like, and again, I'm not even sure I'm saying that right, but it just means that like in Spanish, people will say, went to the park, the girl, instead of like the girl went to the park. And he was making this huge deal out of it. He's like, this is like super unintuitive. The only way you're gonna be able to get this is if you drill it and drill it and drill it. You have to like, listen, watch my videos, buy my courses. And this is like one of the last videos I ever watched from him, and I kind of just had that in the back of my head. I thought about it for a little bit, but I kind of just forgot about it. And like 5 months later, after I got more into the comprehensible input side of things, I realized like, oh, that thing he was talking about, like I just know it, like I just do it. And it was so intuitive to me that I started kind of almost doing it in English sometimes. All I'm saying is like what he was saying was totally not my experience. My experience was some things that seem really unintuitive in the beginning, just over time, you just think to yourself, oh, I got that now. And it wasn't like I struggled with it. It wasn't like I drilled it. Kind of just happened, And that thing specifically was like, turned out to be like the easiest thing, in my opinion. Like, there were things that I thought were much more difficult to grasp and understand. That was like nothing. I was like, oh, well, like he just flipped the sentence around. I mean, it doesn't seem that difficult to me. I just remember that he was so adamant that you absolutely need to drill this into your head or you're never gonna be able to understand it. And then I understood it. Now, if he was saying it like, I personally don't think I could have done this without drilling it, that's different. But when saying to somebody like, you need this, or you can't learn Spanish, I mean, Jesus Christ. Again, that kind of brings it back to this whole idea of like, well, learning a language is really about your intelligence, it's really just like math and science. Like, you just gotta be smart and you'll pick it up. Like, that is not my experience at all. Language learning has been the most like, you put in, you get out what you put in thing I've ever done in my entire life. Like, you do an hour of input, you get out an hour of input. It's like, you don't need to be a genius, and this is just my experience. And the funny thing was when I was in this period of like grammar obsession, because I was watching all these grammar videos, I would ask my girlfriend, I'd be like, oh, like, why do you say this, or why do you say that? And she'd always say, I don't know. And I thought it was so funny. I was like, how do you not know? Now she's kind of in her grammar obsession period, and she always asks me like, or she always says, oh, well, in English you say this and this because of this, and you say this and this because of that. You say this that way because of this. And I'm like, oh yeah, like I never thought about that. Like, oh yeah, I guess that makes sense. Okay, I guess that makes sense as a rule. And the truth is, we just don't know the grammar of our own languages. I know more grammar in Spanish than I know in English, and she probably knows more grammar in English than she knows in Spanish. I probably know the tenses in Spanish better than I do in English, and I think 99% of people don't know English tenses, probably more than 99%. Like, most of us can't name every tense in English, yet we speak in past tense and future tense and present tense completely fine, you know? We just speak it and understand it fine. I just think there's a real overemphasis on grammar and sentence structure and things like, I think that's part of the traditional language camp that says, like, a language is something you memorize and you just kind of brute force it. You just translate in your head. You say, okay, here's a sentence in Spanish I was just given. Here's my vocab. Here's my grammar. Plug that all into the equation, and boom, now I have it in English. Now I can understand it in English. Now I have to translate something in my head to say something back in Spanish, and that's just not scalable. I want to bring this word up because I'm a web developer. And when we build websites, we always say, like, you know, maybe this website works for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people. But would the website still work if 1,000 people used it, if 1,000,000 people used it? That's called scalability. And this idea that you can memorize a language just doesn't scale because there's just so many words, there's so much grammar, there's so much sentence structures. Like, you can't memorize that. It's your brain has a different system for language. Right now, I'm reading Harry Potter. I'm not reading Harry Potter, I'm listening to Harry Potter. If I was trying to do that while Harry Potter was blasting in my ear at full speed, I would never in a million years be able to translate all those things in my head to understand them in English as fast as necessary to listen to the book. Like, that method just doesn't scale. You just can't use your conscious brain to, like, try to compile Spanish into English on the fly. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work at scale, especially not in conversations where you have to then speak to the other person. Another thing I did, which was like almost kind of a different thing, was like kind of the immersion method, where the idea like I was getting was like, okay, you know, you learn a language just by being around the language. So like, you go to Spain for a year, you just hang out with people, and then one day you're gonna wake up and boom, you can speak Spanish, you know? You're gonna wake up and be like, yo hablo español. Yo puedo hablar con fluidez. That's kind of how it was sold to me. And no, it kind of makes sense, right? It kind of makes sense if your brain is like a sponge. You know, you're taking in input from around you, and maybe it's unconscious in the back of your head, and maybe you're just eating a bag of chips in a restaurant, but you're hearing people speak Spanish, and your brain is just saying, got that, got that, got that. You know, maybe that's how it worked, and then also maybe if you put Spanish on while you sleep, or a language on when you sleep, maybe like your brain, while you're sleeping, will be like, oh, I'm hearing a language, let me just record that. And I'm making fun of it now, but I believed it to a certain extent. Also, I kind of wanted it to be true because that sounds kind of easy. You just throw on a movie, you just listen to people talk, and then you just kind of learn Spanish. You don't even know how you learned it. But that did not work for me. And first of all, I don't know how you could ever keep your attention span up when you're watching like native level content when you're a beginner, because you don't understand anything. Like, you'd be lucky to get like 1 or 2 words a movie, you know? And listening in your sleep, again, I didn't think that was effective at all. A lot of people will tell you, you know, they think of language learning. Some people have this like other kind of idea where they'll think to themselves, well, if you just go to a country and you kind of just like immerse yourself there, the language will just happen for you. Like, it was one of those things that seemed like, if this does work, it'll be like magic, because I don't feel it working, you know? Like, I was like, how is this gonna work? And every time I asked myself, how is this gonna work? That was when I started to question the method, because I was like, I don't see how like I'm even getting incrementally better. Like, I was looking for a bit of incrementalism, basically. And the final thing I mentioned I did were flashcards. And I don't actually hate flashcards. I think flashcards are good if you're trying to learn specific things that you need to know on a daily basis. Like, you know, just things like, like when my girlfriend said, oh, like I arrived, or how do I say I arrived? How do I say I'm here? Things like that. Because those are things you kind of just need. But again, it doesn't scale. That's the issue. Like, yes, you can learn the basic things you need to like communicate in the language of flashcards. I think that's totally fine. And I wouldn't knock anyone for doing it. But you just can't continue to use flashcards to get to a high level to where you can understand Harry Potter, for instance. First of all, there's no context in flashcards. You're just reading random words. So, like, your brain doesn't really get a clear picture of how they're used together. And also, like, there's just so many words that eventually, like, for instance now, like, I listen to Harry Potter and there's words I don't understand, but I don't have time to write them all down in flashcards because there's just so many. It's like, And then I listen to it back a month later, or, other things, not Harry Potter, but I'll listen to things back a month later and I'll be like, oh, well, now I understand that word now. So it just kind of happened naturally. And I think what happened to me with flashcards was in the beginning I would use flashcards. Even when I was doing comprehensible input, I would still kind of use flashcards. But as I got better at Spanish, my flashcard use just started to plummet. Up until now, where I just never use flashcards because it just doesn't seem like a good use of my time at this point. All the words that I need to know, I do know. And all the words that I haven't seen yet are kind of complicated words that it wouldn't really make sense to do a flashcard for. Like imagine if you did a flashcard in English for like canopy. Like when's the last time you used the word canopy? I'm sure there are people who actually speak English who don't know what the word canopy means. Or like birch tree. It's like, it would be great to know what that word is. I don't know how to say birch tree in Spanish. Like, I don't know. Like, I would just say, el árbol allá que es blanco, con rayas, no sé. I would say, like, con marcas. I don't know what I would say, but I could describe it fine. People would understand what I was saying. Like, and they might say, oh, that's a birch tree. And I'd be like, oh, a birch, and I would know how to say it in Spanish. Because I can't learn a word that I'm not going to continue to hear. It just would be a waste of time because I'm not going to retain it. Like, the reason I wouldn't retain it is because my brain is basically saying, you don't need this, buddy. Like, you don't need this word yet. Like, basically, when I got to the comprehensible input stuff, I got to it through Pablo from Dreaming Spanish and Miguel from Spanish Input. And both of them like have kind of different theories of language learning, but they're both in like the general broad view of input, and specifically comprehensible input. Like you need to listen to people speak Spanish to learn Spanish. Listen to people speak the language you're trying to learn. That's the only way you're going to grow in the language. And that was what they drilled home, and they both have specific methods within that broad framework. Pablo will say don't speak until you have a certain amount of hours. Don't use subtitles. Don't look up words. Whereas Miguel would say something different. He might say like, use subtitles in your native language, try to get yourself understanding the content you're seeing. But to me, it's not that big of a difference. Like, to me, it's all about pushing that first domino down, because it's true that like in the beginning, to do comprehensible input, you have to understand input in a different language at a 80% comprehension rate or more, basically. You have to understand 80% of what you're watching. And understanding a foreign language at 80% right as a beginner, no matter what video you're watching, it could be a video with pictures, expressions, and all the things that we need to learn comprehensible input, but you could still have trouble because you just don't know the language at all. And I think that the only difference, and I don't want to say the only difference, but it seems to me that in the comprehensible input world, there's this big first domino. It's like, can you kind of hack your way through the beginning? Do you have to do pure input, or can you use subtitles? Can you look up words? Can you do a little bit of grammar? And I don't have a strong opinion on it. Like, I see both sides because I hacked it, but I could totally see someone arguing, well, you hacked it and now you have actually a worse base of Spanish and you have to translate more in your head than someone at your level who didn't do that. Like, basically, I think the argument would be, in the long term, it's not good for you. Maybe in the short term, it'll help you, but in the long term, it's not good for you. So I understand that. But to me, if there was Pablo, Miguel, and then this person who did traditional language teaching, they would agree on 99% of things, right? And that's kind of how I think about it. Like, I don't think the infighting is super necessary. I think it's like, we're all kind of doing input. I think that like the variations of it to me are minor. As long as it just all comes back to input, in my opinion. Like, everybody you talk to, when you get to a certain level, what they say is, it's just input. I just listen to input. I'm 800 hours in, and when you get to my level, there's just nobody doing anything but input anymore. Input is just what we're doing. So the way I look at it, if you're getting into comprehensible input and you're in that range of 0 to 50 hours, like, you're in basically hell, because you have to watch like the most childish baby type videos, and you have to pay full attention, and it's like super draining. And I think that's why people try to hack it like I did. They try to, for me, I put on subtitles in English and Spanish, and I'd watch the same videos over and over and over again, just to try to get that sensation of, okay, I'm unconsciously understanding something. Because that was the difference between everything else in comprehensible input for me. Every 2 or 3 days, every week, every month, I felt that incrementalism. And it wasn't like I thought it would be. People will tell you have to learn a language unconsciously. They don't mean you just turn your brain off, the language comes into your ears while you just think about the weather, and then all of a sudden you end up understanding Spanish a month later. Just because we say something's unconscious, it doesn't mean you're not actively listening. Like, the active listening part is the most important thing. And I think that's the thing with immersion, is you can't really actively listen because it's just too difficult to understand. But comprehensible input, it takes like real focus and attention, and that's why I think it's less of an intelligence thing and way more of a willpower thing. Like, can you will yourself? Does learning that language mean that much to you, that you'll watch hours and hours of content that really isn't that exciting in the beginning to get to where you want to be? And that's what totally sold me, because like I had that feeling of, oh my God, I just unconsciously understood words in Spanish. They didn't come to my head, get translated into English, and dissected that way. The language washed over me. And you'll hear people say that, the language washes over you. You get that feeling like you're listening to something in your native language. Even though it was such a simple sentence that I felt that with, it was that incremental proof that I needed that I wasn't getting from anywhere else. I remember one day I was listening to one of Pablo's videos, and I was walking with my headphones in, and usually it was kind of odd for me to do that because I needed a lot of visuals at that time. But I was listening to Pablo, and I was realizing, like, oh my God, like it sounds like he's speaking English. And it was such an insane feeling. And then it all clicked for me, because I was like, okay, you do feel the Spanish learning happening. It's not like, because the people who are into immersion, I'm like, it almost feels like they're saying, you won't even feel it happening. It'll just be like, it'll just happen to you. But like, no, with the comprehensible input method, you're there actively watching the content, so you're feeling it. Now, that doesn't mean you're actively memorizing. It means your brain is making those connections because you're the one facilitating those connections being made. And I think that was kind of the missing puzzle piece for me, is like, that's how you learn a language. It just made sense. I could see that incremental process, and I saw the scalability. Because if you can understand something super easy, you can understand something that's just plain easy. If you can understand something easy, you can understand something intermediate, and up and up and up and up, and that's exactly what happened to me. Every other thing I was doing fell off as I did more input. And when I got to like my level now, I mean, again, I just can talk to people and listen to Harry Potter for input. And like Harry Potter, I'm not a huge fan of the writing sometimes, but it's a book, and I've watched the movies, so you know, I like it. I actually just read James and the Giant Peach, which I liked, but then the last chapter was like a song. Couldn't stand it, so I had to skip the last chapter, or the second to last chapter. Eventually, you get to listening to content that you actually enjoy, like Luisito Comunica. Like, I love watching Luisito, and that's the best thing about learning a foreign language, is you can kind of assimilate into another culture, especially through the internet. Now, like, I can comment in a Luisito comment section, and people like, I feel like I'm part of the inside jokes and stuff. I understand those things. I think a lot of the time when you're in the beginning stages of comprehensible input, you need to watch videos like these, because you just want someone to say it works. I remember I used to always do this. Like, you just want someone to sit in front of the camera and say, it works, keep going, you got this. So keep going, you got this, and you'll get to the point you want to be at. It's a good break, honestly, listening to people just talk about language learning, because, you know, I've been in the same situation you're in if you're just getting it to like 150 hours, 50 hours, 2 hours, you know. After getting so far in my language learning journey, what I realized is a lot of languages, the issue with comprehensible input is it's really hard to find input, and there's not a lot of good ways to track your hours. So as a web developer, I thought, how can I solve this problem? And how would I go about solving this? So basically what I did was created a platform where you can track your hours, a website that's on mobile or desktop, that you can track your hours in. My philosophy is as simple and convenient as possible. You sign up, it takes you 2 seconds. You onboard, it takes you 2 seconds. You get to the app, and everything is just streamlined, as simple as I could possibly make it for you. And what it does is basically you can take resource URLs that you use from Spotify, from Audible, from YouTube, and you can put them directly in the website. The website will get the resource for you, and it'll store that exact resource, and you can basically watch your comprehension, and all of your stats go up over time. And the cool part about this is I also basically added a way to find resources, which are all those resources people are entering on the site. They get pooled together, and so we can get a nice big pool of resources for every language, basically. Any language you want to learn: Korean, Japanese, Spanish, French, German. Definitely check it out if you're interested. It's called Langualytics. It's totally free, and I'm interested to know what you guys think about it. But basically my dream with it is to be able to just have a big pool of resources, completely crowdsourced difficulty, everything driven by statistics and empirical data, as opposed to someone just nominally saying, this is this is that. I want it all to be data driven, basically. I don't want to get bogged down in telling you everything about it right now. But if you're interested, you should check it out. It's called langualytics.com. And it's free. Al final de los videos que grabo usualmente hablo un poco de español para mostrarles que sí, yo hablo español fluidamente, así que no estoy metiendo, sí, yo puedo hablarlo. Y tengo un poco dialecto argentino porque mi novia es argentina. Y por eso tengo el show, si quieres saber. Pero thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys later.